My name is Danielle Aragoni. I am Director of Livable Communities at AARP. And we are so pleased to have a role today with our partners at 880 Cities here on the World Parks Academy webinar on creating parks and public spaces for people of all ages. I want to give a little bit of background and context as to who we are and why we're here. But before I do that, let me turn to a couple different technical matters. First of all, I hope that everyone can hear and see okay. You should be able to see the main title slide for the presentation that you're about to hear. You should also be able to hear me and shortly hear our presenters, Amanda and David. If at any point you have difficulty with technology or want to ask a question, please use the group chat. If you're not familiar with, you can toggle down to the bottom of your screen and find the chat box. That should open up a box on your screen, which will allow you to send a message either to the group or to any individual on the chat. In addition, this session will be recorded. I believe that you'll be able to access the recordings for that by going back to the World Parks Academy website. And if we'll try to get you some more specific instruction on that before the end of the webinar. And in addition, I want to remind people that you are able to get continuing education credits for this webinar. And I earlier posted in the chat box the address to which you can do that. There's a small fee for it and a requirement that you complete a short assessment. So with that, let me go ahead and get started. We are here to talk today about the value of parks and public spaces, particularly from an intergenerational standpoint. And if you'll advance the slide, David, I want to give you a sense of kind of who's involved in this. So we here at AARP are very much interested and supportive of this work from the perspective of the needs of older adults. Our goal and our ambition through our livable communities work is to ensure that we are creating great places for all people of all ages. And certainly that means that we want to facilitate people's desire and interest to remain in place as they age. And part of being able to do that is knowing that they have a range of affordable and accessible and appropriate housing choices available to them, that they have a range of transportation and mobility solutions available to them, and certainly that they have safe, accessible, activated, engaging public spaces in which to recreate and in which to socialize. So it's with that spirit that we came to this project, if you wouldn't mind advancing the slide, which is a new publication that we released last year entitled Creating Parks and Public Spaces for People of All Ages. You'll be able to access this information now or at any point by going to our website, which is aarp.org/livable, or going to aarp.org/livableparks, where you can download this document for free in print or in PDF form. And part of our motivation in doing that was not only to deepen our partnership with these wonderful organizations, including Trust for Public Land, but certainly to extend and deepen our partnership with 880 Cities, which I'm sure that you all know is really a very well-respected and international leader on the notion of how we can create places that work well for people who are 8, as well as people who are 80, and for everyone in between. That if we're building communities that address the needs of those two age groups, we're really creating great places for all, which is very much our perspective and our ambition as well. So with that, let me turn it over to Amanda O'Rourke and David Simor, who work in 880 Cities, and they will lead the rest of the presentation for you. And at the end, we will take questions through the chat box and facilitate a conversation with our presenters at that time. So Amanda and David.
Great. Thank you so much, Danielle. And hello, everyone, and welcome to the webinar, Creating Parks and Public Spaces for People of All Ages. As Danielle mentioned, my name is Amanda O'Rourke. It's my pleasure to sort of start things off today in the presenter mode. And Danielle mentioned that this webinar is a collaboration of World Urban Parks and the World Parks Academy, AARP, Livable Communities, Trust for Public Land, and 880 Cities. Our organizations have really come together to give community leaders like yourselves tools that they can use to improve parks and public spaces. And excited to deliver the webinar and share this publication with everyone here today. We all on this project have shared goals of creating healthier and more livable communities. And we understand the tremendous power of parks and public spaces as a driver for social equity and improving quality of life for all. So I also want to
Amanda, can I interrupt you? Can I interrupt you for a moment? Some of our guests are asking to speak closer to the mic, that your voice is going in and out.
Okay. Do you want to change the mic? Okay, we're going to try something. We're going to change the mic and see if that helps.
Thank you, everyone on the chat box for flagging that.
Thanks for letting us know. Why don't I switch spots with you in the meantime? Or I'll come closer this way.
Sure.
You start. I'm going to just move closer to the mic.
We're playing musical chairs here up in Canada at the moment.
So I just wanted to.
It's all in the spirit of fun and play, right?
Yeah, is this better? You can't see me, but is it better?
I don't know if it's better. Folks on the chat box, would you let us know, please, how audible Amanda is? Amanda, why don't you speak a little bit and we'll see.
Okay. So I just wanted to acknowledge that this publication was created with a target audience.
I think we need to go back to how it was before, Amanda. It is worse now. I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm hearing that, folks.
We'll go back.
Everyone, thank you for your patience.
Yes, thank you. So let me give this one more chance. So just wanted to acknowledge that this publication was created with a target US audience, and all of the case studies are from the US, which was actually a fun challenge for us at AARP Cities because we do work internationally, but our wonderful partners at the Trust for Public Land and AARP were very helpful in helping us collect these. And we do think that many of the overall themes and strategies are widely applicable depending on where you are. But just wanted to sort of say that this publication was definitely targeted for a US audience. So
Amanda,
yeah.
I'm very sorry to interrupt again. I think it's better if you go back to where you're originally seated.
Okay.
I'm very sorry.
No worries. I'm back, everyone.
Hello, there she is.
So I imagine you got that last point about this as being very focused on the US audience, but certainly applicable around themes. So next slide. So as I said, I'm Amanda. This is me on the left, but you can actually see me on the dialog box as well. I'm the Executive Director of 880 Cities and joined by David Simor, who's a project manager at 880. And David and I will be doing the rest of the talking today. So to start things off, we thought it would be fun to share not just our job titles, but a personal story that connects us to the topic. This is me with my 3 kids. I live in Toronto. That's where we're sitting today in Toronto. And I live in a very tiny house with 3 balls, these wonderful 3 balls of energy. My husband and my mother, actually. So as you can imagine, access to parks and public spaces, to get out of the house and play is really important to me. And we're very lucky to have many parks in our neighborhood. I'm also co-chair of the Children Play and Nature Committee for World Urban Parks. And so this topic is of great interest for me. And David?
So my closest connection and fondest memories of a park as an adult come from my background as a professional actor. I had a lot of fun performing outdoor touring productions of Shakespeare in parks. I had a brief but unspectacular acting career. You can tell why from the photo. But definitely those experiences really hit home for me how parks are spaces, or in this particular case, stages, for intergenerational storytelling and community building.
So, thanks, David. Here's our action-packed agenda for today. There's a lot of content in this publication, in this guide. So today we're going to be highlighting key elements. How am I doing on audio? Good? I'm gonna.
I think you're doing okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
Great. So our agenda is welcome. We're going to talk a little bit about who 880 Cities is. We'll do an introduction to the guide itself. We're going to talk about the chapters in the guide, the goals, strategies, and spotlights. And then David's going to take over and talk about how to use the toolkit. And then we'll have time for Q&A. I'm actually going to ask to move over because maybe if we switch, maybe my voice will project better. Great. Thanks, David. Okay, so 880 Cities, we're a nonprofit organization. We're based in Toronto, as I mentioned, and our mission is to improve the quality of life for people living in cities, no matter their age, ability, or socioeconomic status. We pursue this mission by bringing people together to transform mobility and public space so that together we can create more vibrant, healthy, and equitable communities. We do work internationally. Danielle did a wonderful job of sort of explaining the 880 concept. And over the last 11 years, we've worked in over 300 cities on 5 continents. Our organization was founded by Gil Penalosa, the former commissioner in Bogota, Colombia, and an internationally renowned city builder. I've had the pleasure of working with Gil over the last 11 years, so it's been exciting to see how the organization has grown and evolved from a small outfit to a now globally recognized and celebrated brand and influencer. So why are we called 880 Cities? We're based on this very simple, but we think powerful idea that if everything we did in our cities was great for an 8-year-old and an 80-year-old, then it would be great for everyone. When you build a city thinking about the experience of our most vulnerable residents, you really build a city for all, and this is our strong belief. I love this picture from Mexico City. You really see all of the generations represented. This is a pop-up park in a way. You take the streets and turn it into a large pop-up park every Sunday for people to use. And the family dog gets to come too. So our gift to you today is your very own set of 880 goggles, invisible 880 goggles. Put them on to use it to evaluate your city, your neighborhood, your park. And this is an overarching perspective that we employ in all the work that we do, and certainly when we created the Parks Guide. And people often ask us, okay, we understand the 880 question, but actually what is the sort of overarching idea around creating an 880 city? For us, it's really about reclaiming the right to the city for people. We know that for the last 80 years, we've been planning our cities, thinking a lot more about moving cars than on the health and happiness of people. And this has had a disproportionately negative effect on people who do not drive, children, older adults, and the economically marginalized. It has also been coupled with a disinvestment in parks and public space and diminished value for public life in our cities and communities. So an 880 city is a community that affirms these 3 rights that you see on your screen: the right to mobility, the right to public space, and the right to education. Talk about the right to mobility. It means that everyone, no matter their age or ability, should be able to walk, bike, or take public transit safely. We often ask, would you send an 8-year-old or an 80-year-old to cross the street to the park? If you would, it's safe. You wouldn't not, and we have to do much better. The right to participate. Everyone should have a voice in decision-making processes of our communities. I'm hearing a little bit of feedback, so just if you are not presenting, if you could put yourself on mute, that would be helpful. That means looking beyond the traditional consultation approaches and thinking about how to reach underrepresented groups, such as children, older adults, families with young children, like in this picture, caregivers, and low-income populations. And the last is the right to public space. Everyone, young and old, parks and public spaces in the way that they are designed. And so it's about the public space that we find ourselves having to do today. So this brings me back to the Parks Guide. Best to parse out some of those key messages, strategies, and ideas and tools from this publication. We really created this guide to help city leaders, community organizations, and people like you accomplish some of your own goals on park improvement projects. So let's start with why this is important. This may seem really obvious to this group who work in parks, but we never underestimate the importance of highlighting why the heck we are doing this in the first place and why people should care about this anyway. The truth is, many municipalities neglect their park networks or fail to invest in these vital places as their communities grow and change. Municipal budgets are tight. Many communities are pinched for funds and priorities. Parks are often one of the first items to get cut because they're perceived as nice to have rather than essential infrastructure. And that's why we always start with the benefits. Our founder, Bill Penalosa, is fond of saying, parks are not just. So I'm getting a lot of feedback. Again, I'm wondering if Ben, who's our technical person, can mute anyone who's not presenting.
Yeah, I'm trying to make that happen. I need to fix a couple of things, but we should be able to get that fixed soon.
Thanks, Ben. Okay, so again, that's why we always start with the benefits, and our founder, Gil, is fond of saying parks are not just about fun and games. In fact, they have significant benefits. They improve physical health, mental health, they provide cleaner air and water, they enhance community connections, and they add value and save money. Parks improve mental and physical health. We know access to parks raises physical activity levels, it reduces obesity rates, it reduces stress. For children, play outside makes them happier and healthier. It is a key part of their healthy development. And for older adults, parks and public spaces provide opportunities for physical activity and social engagement and reduce social isolation. If you drink water and breathe air, you should care about parks. They play a big part in preserving ecosystem health and reducing stormwater runoff. We know quality parks can help build community pride and increase social trust among neighbors. Conversely, when parks are neglected and underinvested, they can be spaces that are unsafe and undesirable. And last but not least, this is an important economic argument for making an investment in parks. They contribute to increased property values, which means increased tax revenue, tourism, they provide healthcare savings, and they can improve safety and reduce policing costs if they are well programmed and well managed. But we also know through our research that many parks aren't benefiting people of all ages. Our parks are falling short for children and older adults. Our population is getting older, so by 2050, 1 in 5 Americans will be over 60. Globally, by 2050, we have a total of 2 billion people aged 60 plus. And just to put that in perspective, it will basically double from 2015 numbers. In 2014, a study of 174 neighborhood parks in the 25 major US cities found that although adults age 60 and older accounted for about 20% of the population, they represented only 4% of total park users. Now, is that because older adults don't like going to parks? Of course not. The way we plan, design, and manage our parks need to adjust to this changing demographic. Clearly, they have not. We also know the trend for childhood moving more indoors. The amount of time children spend outside has declined significantly over the past 2 generations. Children are not getting enough daily physical activity. There's a decline in independent and unstructured play in nature, which is important for their health and development. And exposure to too much technology has also been linked to decreased happiness and psychological well-being in teens. So these are some of the many reasons that we decided to embark on this, creating this publication, and help bring light to and address this specific challenge of creating parks that attract children and older adults. In addition, we wanted to build off the Trust for Public Lands 10-minute walk campaign. That is that every person should have a fantastic park or public space within a 10-minute walk. So the purpose of this guide is to really make that goal achievable for people of all ages, and note that it is not just about a park, but a fantastic or quality park within walking distance. So the guide is separated into 3 chapters or goals. One is improve existing parks, the second is connecting people to parks, and 3 is creating new parks. We organized it this way because we know not every community has the same challenges. Some have lots of park land, but the parks are not attractive and need to be improved. Some have lots of park land, but it's hard for people to get to the parks. And some communities don't have much park land and need to create new parks, even if it means looking at unconventional spaces. Your community may also need to focus on all 3 of these goals. It's really a kind of menu of goals for you to select and prioritize. The way the guide is organized is that under each goal we have strategies and then spotlights. Strategies to achieve the goals, and then a spotlight or kind of case study on a park that is a good example or good practice. So let's look at goal 1. Improving existing parks. Aside from proximity, one of the key predictors of whether a park will be used is the amount of activities it provides. And that's why our first goal is provide activities. It sounds really obvious, but you'd be surprised to see how many parks do not. So a wide range of programs, events, and activities all year round are critical to creating parks that are dynamic, inclusive, accessible, and welcoming to people of all ages and interests. It's important to provide activities in all seasons. Being in Canada, we have worked in a lot of cities with cold winters, and I cannot tell you how many times we've heard that city park managers consider their parks unofficially closed in the winter. That is obviously not a very efficient use of a public asset if it is not used 3 to 4 months of the year, which is about how much winter we get in some of our cities. I imagine there may be a similar kind of mindset for cities with hot climates and the summer months. So we've seen some of that as well. So again, all ages, year-round, and different times of the day as well. So our spotlight for this strategy is Clyde Warren Park in Dallas, Texas. It is a popular gathering spot for city residents and also a destination for tourists. It has free activities like yoga and dance classes, storytelling, lectures, outdoor performances, and outdoor movies. Activities go from about 6 a.m. to 11 p.m. and have broad appeal to people of diverse ages. Moving on to the second strategy is design for all. So there are 3 things included in this. This is actually one of the larger chapters, I guess, in the guide. So the 3 things we really focused on was comfortable places to sit, amenities, and infrastructure that is multi-generational. So when thinking about creating parks for people of all ages, remember those 880 goggles that I gave you. Safety and comfort are very important. They are rated as high priorities for children and older adults, but also for women and parents with young children. Walking paths are actually often rated as the #1 facility that users want in a park. A smooth surface for walking allows older adults to walk without fear of tripping and falling, and easier to navigate if you have a mobility device. So this picture is a great example in Florida, but there's no place to sit and rest. It looks like they had the idea of putting in benches eventually. But nice benches and seating is also really important when designing for all ages. We've had focus groups with seniors who say they don't go out and walk because there are not enough benches to simply sit and rest. So some of these things are really simple ideas. When it comes to amenities, bathrooms are also really important. Here's a picture of one of my favorite park bathrooms of all time. This is in Bryant Park, New York. And I'm not saying they have fresh flowers, it's gorgeous, you would never know that it looks more like a hotel bathroom than a park bathroom. And I'm not saying that all parks have to have this quality of a bathroom, But I can tell you, as a mom of 3 kids, I'm not going to spend much time in a park unless I know there's a bathroom close by. And this is also a key concern that we have heard from older adults. So this may seem really simplistic to talk about bathrooms, but I'm always shocked at how many parks do not have them or that are closed or locked up for a lot of times of the day and different seasons. In the guide, we also talk about some multi-generational playgrounds, like is seen here. You can see this young girl in a spinner, but also an older adult using the exercise equipment in the background. Important to note that equipment and facilities for young and old can also be games that appeal across diverse ages, like chess, ping pong, and bocce. This is just one picture, an example. The guide also talks a lot about the importance of flexible and multi-use design. This is a great water feature that kids can play in and dogs can drink from. And there are many more examples of parks that do this well. But for now, I'll move on in terms of the chapters and strategies. So our third strategy is engage and energize. So instead of being merely regulators, park managers need to be facilitators and invite residents, community groups, and local businesses to bring life and energy to parks. If you are a park advocate, you will need to build some relationships with park managers to get a shift towards a more kind of co-creation model with the parks. Our spotlight for this strategy is the Elm Play Lot in Richmond, California. This is located in the city's Iron Triangle neighborhood. It sits in an area with high levels of poverty and at times crime. The city's attempt to revitalize the park completely failed when it installed a generic off-the-shelf playground, equipment, and nothing else. The play set was vandalized within the first week. So soon after, in 2008, Pogo Park, a local nonprofit in the area that was focused on community-led revitalization, stepped in. And this Pogo Park team understood that a successful transformation of the space depended upon residents being directly involved in the process. So Pogo Park hired and trained residents from the community to serve on the Elm Play Lot Action Committee. So this committee consisted of community members committed to planning, designing, building, and managing the Elm Play Lot. They adopted an iterative approach to their work by constructing prototypes of ideas collected from the community. The successful samples were fine-tuned for permanent use. So now, kind of open from sunrise to sunset, the Elm Play Lot has on-site staff and offers a variety of free arts, nature, and exercise programs. The space also features a community center with a kitchen and bathrooms, my favorite. There's a zip line, a tot lot, a community garden, a trike path, several barbecue pits, and custom-made benches. They also offer simple, really practical programs. Again, these ideas came directly from the community for after-school homework clubs, chess clubs, and activities run by a performing arts center. But I love that story. I think it's a great example of placemaking in action. For our next goal, connecting people to parks. Accessibility to parks is essential. All journeys begin and end with a walk, and walking is the most popular activity in parks. Children and older adults especially benefit from walkable neighborhoods with strong connections to amenities and public spaces, and people who interact often with others are less likely to experience dementia if they walk regularly. And research also shows that children who walk to local destinations, such as a school or a park, exhibit higher levels of happiness, energy, and relaxation. So our two strategies under connecting people to parks are put pedestrians first and remove barriers. So for put pedestrians first, we want to consider the distance, safety, and comfort of the pedestrian connections to the parks. The connectivity and maintenance of sidewalks, lighting, streetscape, vehicular speeds, and safe crossings. Remember those 80 goggles I gave you at the beginning of the presentation. This picture is of a park we audited in Miami, Florida. As you can see, the entrance is not at all welcoming or accessible for someone with a mobility device or stroller. When it comes to removing barriers, think about the edges of the parks, widen and improve decorate entrances, remove unnecessary fences and gates, and where appropriate, you can add greening and landscaping. We like to think of this as kind of putting out the welcome mat for the park. Our spotlight for this strategy is Centennial Commons. It's an initiative of the Fairmount Park Conservancy in Philadelphia. And one of its projects, called Parkside Edge, had the goal of making it easier and more attractive for residents from the adjacent Parkside community to access the park. The street that separates the park from the residences was dangerous to cross, and because of fast-moving traffic in the area. So they added pedestrian crossing and traffic calming measures, and the project really improved the safety for people walking to the park. They also, to entice residents into the park, they added custom swings and benches along the street to make the area more than just an access way to a large open field. The neighbors in the area talked about how much they wanted it to be a kind of communal front porch. And the design here was inspired by those sort of front porch swings, which is also a wonderful element. So the additions have really helped to integrate the park into the streetscape and attract people of all ages and abilities to the space. And our last goal is creating new parks, even in unconventional spaces. So for neighborhoods lacking traditional parkland, many other publicly owned spaces can serve as catalysts for community transformation. This includes, but is not limited to, courtyards, parking lots, lawns, fields of schools, libraries and civic centers, vacant lots, laneways, highway underpasses, bus shelters, and streets. It's a long list of places that you can reimagine to be parks. So we've outlined two strategies here, is take back space and think outside the box. For take back space, really to parkify an unconventional space, you have to be imaginative and creative. Be sure the new space is adding value and amenities that are needed and wanted by the community. This picture is of a vacant lot we worked with community partners to transform in West Palm Beach, Florida. I've actually already shown you the after shot of this space in this presentation at the beginning, where you saw the kids playing in the tire swing and using different loose parts to play. So you can go back to the presentation and find it, see if you can find it. The second is really thinking outside the box. Because there's no real formal process to create these new park spaces, you need to take the time to understand and go around often regulatory roadblocks. You need to find champions in the community and identify shared goals with these partners to advocate for these new spaces. So this picture is an open street program which temporarily transforms city streets into giant pop-up parks on a few Sundays a year. So it's also interesting to think of time of day for creating new public spaces. School parking lots on weekends or church parking lots on weekdays are also a great example of using time and space. So our spotlight for this strategy is Gallery Alley in Wichita, Kansas. The Wichita Downtown Development Corporation transformed an underused alley into a vibrant, walkable public space filled with outdoor dining and activities in art and music by local artists and entertainers. In its prior life, this alley was used by downtown drivers as basically traffic avoiding shortcut. And to make this space cozier, the alley's brick pavement was painted in bright colors, and bistro lights were strung along the entire 140-foot length. So sometimes all it takes to transform a space is some paint, strings of light, tables and chairs, and people. So by activating the alley with simple interventions, Wichita turned a dark, unsafe space into a safe, welcoming, and inviting destination for everyone. So, phew, that's, let's take a breath. I know that was a lot of content, and there's even more content in the guide, but I'm going to turn it over to David now, who I very rudely kicked out of this seat. So I'll give it back to him so he can talk about the toolkit.
Thanks, Amanda. Okay. So now that Amanda has sort of walked us through the goals and strategies that support improving our parks, getting people to our parks, and creating new parks from unconventional spaces, the next thing that the guide we really want to talk about now is the answer to a question that we get asked quite often. Most recently, we got asked it in Miami. We were working on a project there with the Downtown Development Authority, And the GDA was saying, okay, so we get the need to design parks for people and places for people and to make our parks walkable and to look for underutilized spaces that can be parkified, but what we don't know is how well the spaces we have now are currently performing. How do we know where we need to focus our energy? Essentially, how 880 friendly are we? And how do we find out? And the answer to that question is where we turn to the second part of the guide, the toolkit, which is really designed to guide local leaders and residents alike through the process of understanding how well existing spaces are working, which will then allow us to concentrate your energies and your very precious dollars on addressing the things that you're doing poorly rather than doubling down on things that you're already very good at. So the toolkit sort of lets us answer some pretty important questions. Before we can start to improve spaces, we really need to know who's currently using them, how they're using them, what's preventing them from being used more, who isn't currently using them and is underrepresented in the user base, what opportunities exist for us to improve those spaces, and who needs to be at the table making decisions about how to improve them. So that's a lot of questions, and of course, some of the tools will answer some of those questions or address one of these specific goals, and other tools will answer multiple questions and speak to several of these goals. So I mentioned earlier that I trained as an actor, and as an actor, I was encouraged to think of all the lessons as tools in a toolkit, and to recognize that certain jobs only require certain tools. As an actor, I'd need some tools if I was going to play Hamlet, but I'd need a very different set of tools if I was going to be in Joseph in the Technicolor Dreamcoat. Obviously, as an actor, I wanted to fill my actor's toolbox with as many tools as I could, never knowing what any part would require, and it's the same with our parks toolkit. Not every park or space is going to require every tool found in the guide. You and your community will know what tools are most appropriate for the task at hand, but you definitely want, of course, as many tools at your disposal as you can get. So let's dive into all the tools you'll need in your 880 Parks toolbox. And the first tool is really about getting a bird's eye view of the community or city that you're working in. Who is in this neighborhood, and how well are they served right now by existing conditions? And the great news about this tool is that you don't need to get up from your desk in order to utilize it. It can be done remotely on a computer thanks to two fantastic resources: the AARP Livability Index and the Trust for Public Life ParkServe. So for both resources, you can visit the website and type in the location of the park in question. And then with the AARP Livability Index, you can use an address, a zip code, a town, a city, a county, and then access an overall livability assessment and determine a score in as many as 7 major categories. So they give you a broad understanding of some of the strengths and weaknesses of the community, demographics, and the needs and opportunities that can be addressed through improving parks and public spaces in that area. The ParkServe tool allows us to assess the availability of parks and green spaces within a 10-minute walk of any residential property. So it's going to give you a really good sense of whether or not there's a need for more park space, or if the need really lies more in the quality and connectivity to existing park spaces. So both sites together really provide you with some key data and help identify needs that can support any improvements you're trying to address. The second tool we want in your toolkit is all about understanding what's happening on the ground, the nuts and bolts. So that first tool was sort of a mile-high view of the city. This next tool is really very much the nuts and bolts, nitty-gritty details. And there's no way to really figure that out other than hitting the pavement or the grass or the basketball court and assessing the current conditions and usage of that park or public spaces. And I think people tend to dismiss how much we can learn simply by being in a park and watching what happens. You can see this is a picture of Amanda out there in the middle of winter taking fantastic notes. The power of observation is immense. And cities, however, really only tend to observe, for the most part, the movements of cars and nothing else. And so we need to really expand what we observe if we're going to understand how and who our parks are being used for and by. And so in order to do that, we have to actually count people in public spaces. And this toolkit has a few different ways to do that, each measuring and observing different aspects of people in parks. The first audit contained in the guide is a public space field study, which has 2 parts. A movement study and an activity study. And it's inspired by Jan Gehl's Public Space, Public Life Studies. And it really just focused simply on documenting people in spaces. And of course, we need to do that at different times of the day, different days of the week, different seasons of the year. We need to know not just how many people are moving through a space, but who they are, how they're moving through that space, and what they're doing in that space. And obviously one of the very important observations you can get from this kind of tracking is really if it tells you that there's enough in a park to actually draw people there. This is a park that Amanda and I saw in Miami. You can see it's a beautiful spring day, lots of sunny weather, some fluffy clouds. And if you were to look at a map, you'd think this community is really well served because it's very close to this park. But then when you actually go there and observe, you realize there's not actually anything in this park to really draw people there. So if the park is empty most of the time, day and night, weekday and weekend, then you obviously need to know, you need to address and actually build things in the park to draw people there. You obviously want to be looking at, do park users match the racial, economic, and age demographics of the neighborhood that you're working in? Again, if it doesn't, then you've got some really crucial information about who you need to be working with in order to make improvements. This is just an example of the data analyzed from a project we did in actually City of Toronto park. We found there that the user data does not at all line up with the demographic data of the neighborhood. Older adults make up 9% of the community. They're only 2% of park users. Children and youth were similarly underrepresented in the park users as compared to the neighborhood as a whole. So that data was really crucial in informing the kinds of recommendations, interventions, and activations the City of Toronto need to focus on to create a more welcoming park for everyone. From that same report, our studies also illustrated the importance of tracking gender. Only 42% of park users were women. And we know that women tend to be far more impacted and far less likely to spend time in spaces that are badly maintained or dirty or unsafe. And we would never know any of this if all we counted was the number of people moving through a park. A second audit contained in the guide is a really simple public space audit. The previous audit was all about hard data, raw numbers, but it's important to gather more than just empirical data. We have to understand on an intuitive, emotional level how a park is functioning. And so this audit will ask you to assess the more qualitative aspects of a park from an 880 perspective. So you'll be making observations about the types of uses, programs, design features of the site and its surroundings, and more importantly, how likely you would be to allow a child or an older relative to visit that site. So it's more of an intuitive, user-centric way to understand the experience of a park. And if you're to understand the connectivity and accessibility of a park, then of course it's important we evaluate the walkability of the area surrounding the park, from streets, sidewalks, to intersections. And AARP has this fantastic walk audit that's going to help you identify areas of concern from the perspective of a pedestrian. And then you can share those results with officials and municipal staff to try and address those issues. The AARP audit is a fantastic resource in the toolkit, and it's incredibly, incredibly detailed and specific. If you put all of these audits together, you can start to build a really clear and detailed picture of how this park or public space is performing, who it's performing for. You'll be armed with data to build your case at City Hall for improvements, which can always be a difficult hurdle to overcome, we know. And then, and by the way, these images, the way that we've shown that presenting this data has a lot of icons and design work, but it doesn't actually need to be that way. The data can be represented really simply, and the numbers will be strong and compelling. And, all the time it really took us to gather this information, all the resources was just some time, a pair of eyes, some paper, and a pen. Observation is really simple, and yet it's an incredible, powerful tool in our toolbox. So let's use it. The next tool is one that cities do tend to use, but maybe not always in the most effective way possible, and that's, of course, talking to the users of the park. But when we say talk to the users of the park, we don't mean calling a town hall meeting and holding it at 7 p.m. at City Hall with microphones and speeches. That method of consultation is quite exclusionary and really only actually talks to and connects to one particular kind of park user. So when we're talking about talking to park users, we mean talking to them when they're actually in the park as part of their everyday lives and routine. And to do that, all you need is a simple intercept survey. And the purpose of conducting these surveys is to really verify that some of the assumptions and observations you made from using the other tools are actually accurate. And they allow us to really dig deeper and uncover unexpected insights and explanations from the people who use the space on a day-to-day basis. And a great example of that, a project we're also currently working on in the city of Ottawa, Canada's national capital, in which we're working with the city trying to understand how a public space and market in that city works. And the city of Ottawa was actually rather nervous about having us do public interest analysis. They thought that people were going to be really angry if we stopped them and asked them if they had a couple of minutes to fill out the survey. They didn't understand why we couldn't just count things and leave it at that. Why do we have to deal with talking to people at all? I kid you not. And of course, there are some things that you'll never know if you talk to people. Simple questions like, what do you like about the space? What actually draws you here? What are the barriers preventing you from getting into this space? Are incredibly helpful information that you'll never learn from a map or a movement study or an activity study. Quantitative data is really important when it comes to helping us make design-based decisions. But qualitative data is equally important, especially when it comes to understanding the framework with which we're making design decisions. So don't discount that kind of qualitative data. And of course, when we're talking to people in the park, make sure you really are talking to all of the people in the park, all of the park users. We know that cities often tend to struggle when it comes to people experiencing homelessness, spending time in parks. And the solution most often preferred by cities is to kind of shoo those people away and out of the park. And we would suggest a different approach, as parks belong to those people as much as they do to anyone else. We recently worked with Kenneth Balfett, this gentleman here, who is an artist as well as an engagement expert in Copenhagen, Denmark. And he shared with us the story of Folkets Park, a park in that city that was going through a redesign process. And it was also a park that those experiencing homelessness often spent time in, hanging out there and drinking beer. Kenneth worked with them, and he actually called them the beer drinkers. And he centered the beer drinkers in the redesign process. He knew that they were actually the super users of the park. They spend more time in that park than anyone else, so they actually have the best understanding of what that park needs and what it's doing really well already. And so their expertise was actually really key in creating a new park that would work for everyone, including the underhoused. I don't really have time to get into that whole story, but there is a short documentary with the link here that is a must-watch for anyone interested in inclusive community engagement or in working in public spaces with a user base that has a variety of socioeconomic backgrounds. The next tool, we've emphasized a lot the importance of diverse programming in a park. And this next tool is to help you fill in any gaps you may have noticed when it comes to activation in your parks. So you're with this sort of programming calendar worksheet, you'll be able to list and categorize all the activities that currently take place in the park. And then you can start to see the gaps in programming, whether it's seasonable gaps, whether it's times of the day, or whether it's gaps in providing activities for certain people's different age groups or socioeconomic backgrounds. So to provide you a platform to start brainstorming programming ideas that be appropriate for those missing days, times of the year, or demographic groups. Oftentimes, when people think about ideas to improve a park, they tend to focus on infrastructure. They tend to think about we need more trees, or more benches, or more lighting, or another baseball diamond, or soccer pitch. But great park management goes beyond infrastructure and maintenance. Activities are what brings parks to life. Our founder Gil likes to say that it's often easier for cities to find the millions to build a park than the thousands to make it a well-used park. So programming might seem like a nice to have when it comes to park management, but it's those small thousands of dollars on bringing parks alive that allow us to unlock the full benefits that Amanda talked about at the top of the presentation. So get the full bang for your park buck and activate your parks. So after compiling and analyzing all of the data that you've gathered from the previous tools, you should by that point have a good understanding of what the issues are in the park that you're trying to address and some ideas about how to tackle them. And so this next tool is really about identifying partners and allies who can help you implement some of those ideas and address some of those problems. So this community asset map tool is a visualization that helps you brainstorm and identify the individuals and organizations who may share your vision or have the power or resources to push your project forward. The important part here is really to ask how these goals, the goals of your project align with the goals and interests and agendas of the people you want to connect with. So there's common ground that you share when you do reach out to them. And this kind of experience doesn't actually have to take much time. This kind of exercise doesn't have to take much time, but it can pay huge dividends. So we did an asset mapping exercise when we were working with the Open Streets program organizers in Charlotte, North Carolina. And in 20 minutes, they identified almost 100 stakeholders that can provide support from funding to volunteers to advocacy. And it can really feel like when you're working on this kind of work that we're shouting into the void, that you know, we're really having to go at it alone. But in reality, we don't need to. We can lean on like-minded partners in our communities to help us get the job done. They do exist. We just rarely take the 20 minutes to actually brainstorm and come up with them. And then the last tool we really want to speak about in the guide is the AARP pop-up demonstration toolkit. There are many approaches to trying new ideas, from simpler things like simply bringing a knitting club out to a park, to some things that are more elaborate, like full-on pop-up tactical urbanism projects. And the idea, of course, is to make sure that these temporary projects, regardless of scale, are highlighting and addressing the issues you identify, and that you're bringing in community members into sort of making these projects, make sure they're centered in the making of these projects. You're testing out ideas to make sure, that can be scaled up or made permanent. And it's important to emphasize that testing out these things doesn't need to be a big production. It doesn't need to have millions of dollars behind it or months and months of careful planning. We're not sending rockets to Mars here. We're just simply taking something perhaps that you're already doing and bringing it outside into a park or public space. So there's a project we worked on in a small suburb of Toronto called Whitby, where they had this public square here that was almost always empty, regardless of the time of the year. And so we worked with the town and the recreation department to just start bringing some of the classes they normally do inside, outside into the square. All it took was an extra $75 to move the sound equipment outside. They did this for 7 weeks and ran the classes outside for 7 weeks. And by the end of 7 weeks, the community had actually started asking the city permission to program the square themselves. For $75, the town tested out something really simple and jump-started community conversations about what to do with this underutilized public space. So pilot projects can be big, but they don't have to be in order to be effective. And then we've got a bonus tip, actually, which is around volunteers. Because with many of these tools, whether it's the public space field study, the intercept surveys, the pop-up demos, you're going to need volunteers not only for additional capacity, but also to community input and ideas. And so where do you find volunteers can often be a bit of a challenge. And so first off, of course, look to the local community, particularly if you're working in a local community that has been marginalized or economically disadvantaged. One of the ways you can avoid being seen as an outsider is having local community members leading the studies and doing the public intercept surveys. Another great resource, of course, are colleges and universities. Planning students are always great resources for public life studies. And high school students often need volunteer hours to graduate, so be sure to tap them as well. Always remember to try and keep volunteers fed with snacks or bottles of water. They'll really appreciate it and be far more likely to come back and help again. And lastly, if you are working in an economically marginalized community, compensate local volunteers somehow, even if it's a small honorarium or a gift card or a donut. Make sure that those folks are being compensated in some way. Really show that you respect and appreciate their time. So, again, the main tools are all about getting a bird's eye view of the community and the surrounding area of the park and understanding the demographic realities of the community that you're serving. Then hit the park and observe what's actually happening and taking place in the park on a day-to-day basis. Talk to the park users themselves in the park and confirm if what you're observing is accurate. Look at who's missing in the park, what's missing in the park. Identify what program is taking place and who it's geared towards. And remember, you don't need to do everything yourself. Make connections, build alliances for those already doing good work in the community. And don't be afraid to try things out, big and small. If it doesn't work, it doesn't mean it failed. It means you learned something really important from your test. So the last note I want to leave you on, this is a picture of me on my first tricycle growing up. And I'll be honest, I was completely scared of the tricycle when I was a kid, when my parents gave it to me. I was kind of a scaredy cat. I was afraid of everything. But the first place I was allowed to ride my bike was to my local park. And the sense of confidence I got in being allowed to steer myself to the park, to feel a sense of ownership of the park because I rode there myself, was really big for me. That park was the first place in the world that I felt like was mine. And that's a really powerful thing for a timid child to feel. And I was lucky enough to have a park a short ride away. Every child should be so lucky. So if you take anything away from the guide and from this presentation, it's let's make that happen. Let's have every child have a park within 10 minutes of their home so they can all feel that sense of connection to a place. So that's it for the formal presentation. Thank you all. I guess we can now, I'll move away from the presentation there. And if folks have questions or anything, we've got the chat bar and happy to answer anything that might have come up.
Thank you so much, David and Amanda. I've seen your presentation before. I love seeing it again because I think all the stories and the practices that you describe are so applicable and so useful. And we at AARP really hope that this resource is of value to all of you on the line here and to the partners with whom you work. We did work very hard to ensure that we were not only featuring places that, while they came from the US, they did represent a diversity of type of place, a diversity of type of weather condition, to Amanda's point, and that we actually gave you some tools that you can go and use. And David explained those very well, and I think articulated how different tools are appropriate at different stages in the process. So hopefully you heard in that something that's relevant and pertinent to you. I don't see any questions at the moment in the chat box. We'll give it another minute or so in case any of this presentation has spurred thoughts from any of you, but I'd invite you also to share any examples or cases where you might have applied strategies such as the ones Amanda and David described in your own parks or in your own communities. So I'll pause and let people chime in here. Abel asked the question, is the toolkit available online? It is. The website to access the tool, one of the ways in which you can access the tool is by going to our website, which is aarp.org/livableparks. That's also in the chat box. Please go there, download the document, print off whatever pages you like or want to use, or request it in print form, and we'll be happy to provide it to you for free. Thank you, Carolyn, for your nice words. Any other questions or comments out there from the group? Amanda or David, any closing thoughts from you?
Thank you, Danielle, for moderating and also for the opportunity. Reaching out. AARP and AAB Cities are just so excited about this collaboration, and also being able to do this through the World Urban Parks platform is just a pleasure. It's sort of combining all of our shared goals around creating healthier and happier communities. And just wanted to say, I know we covered like a lot of content on the webinar, and there's actually even more in the guide itself. Yeah, if you have any questions about the guide, please feel free to reach out to Danielle or AAB Cities. We'd be happy to share, answer any questions and share further studies or case studies that are in the US, but also outside of the US as well.
Absolutely. All right. Well, with that, I think we'll close the webinar. Thank you all for dialing in. And again, thank you for your patience at the top of the hour with our technology. We're very glad that you stuck around and hope that you found value. Thanks again.
Thanks, everyone.